So, hello everyone. I'm Saima Rafet and I'm the Inclusion Executive Coach here at Bradford Council. Today's session I'll be chairing, and we have, as I said, Lizzie Wharton, who is the BSL interpreter who'll be signing us for us today to ensure the session is accessible. So I'm going to begin with some housekeeping first. I have initially muted everyone, but just so I can kind of present and allow Jonathan, who will be coming up next, to present without an interruption. But please feel free to raise your hands if there is anything you'd like to say. The session is also transcribed as well as recorded. And we do have a high number of people. So if I find the bandwidth is slowing and we can't hear presenters, I may just mute videos or ask politely in the chat for everyone to mute their videos, just so we can ensure we can hear the presenters and speakers speak. And to reduce any technological issues that we could have with high bandwidth. So also, if anybody has any questions, you feel free to use the chat function. There's also a Q&A function. I would advise that as a starting point, maybe everyone provide their name and organisation in the chat, just so we know who everyone is here. And during the session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. If you have any questions for the panel members, direct them to me in the chat or the Q&A function, and I will endeavour to pose as many of these as possible. So just to give you a quick overview, following an initial attempt by myself at introducing the panel members and today's presenter, the session will begin with a 10-minute presentation, followed by the opportunity for panel members to offer their reflections. After this, we will pose some questions to the panel members before bringing in an audience contribution. And finally, the session will end with a short summary of today's discussions and a final opportunity for reflections from the panel. I'm also going to apologise in advance because we are on a tight schedule. So although I might not be able to get through all the questions, I'm going to try my absolute best to group as many as I can. So in essence, everyone's contribution is considered and as many questions as possible are addressed. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our panel members. The first up, we have Mark Clayton, who's been a Senior Economic Policy Officer at Bradford Council for over 20 years. Mark has an interesting background in economics, planning, chemistry and statistics, and has been endorsed for his dedication to the city of Bradford and the people that live within it and work within it. Mark has also been recognised as a visionary in his approach and always seeking new innovative ways to improve the quality of life for the people in Bradford, hence perfectly placed as our panel member on this session. Next, we have Helen Johnston, who is now a Senior Policy Officer following her extensive experience in the Council spanning over 18 years. Helen was most recently a Policy Officer for 5 years following previous experience as Community Engagement, Development and Equality Officer. She also has experience of overseeing research.
Could I just say, sorry to interrupt, could you just slow down a little bit?
So sorry, Lizzie. Yes.
Very fast. It's okay. I'm just struggling to keep up.
That's fine. I will slow down, Lizzie. So Helen was most recently a policy officer for about 5 years, and she has quite a lot of experience in the council, spanning over 18 years. Helen also has experience of overseeing research relating to strategy and policy, and a master's degree in social science, risk, crisis and disaster management. And last but not least, we have Jonathan Moody, who's a well-established member of the Stronger Communities team, and he's our data guru. Now, Jonathan has kindly and under a very, very tight schedule, I must say, developed an insight for us to deliver a presentation on how Bradford has changed over the past decade. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Jonathan, who again, on a tight schedule, will share this data with us before we open up to the panel for comments. So over to you, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I'd just like to say you've denied me my opportunity in not being able to, I'm having to present my own slide, so I'm not going to have my Chris Whitty moment of being able to ask for next slide, please. But I'll manage. Can you allow me to share, please?
I will do. I'm just trying to see where I've done that. 1 second. You can present, meaning apparently you can present.
It's not showing on my...
Just double check, Jonathan. Yep, you're there as co-organizer. I'll do everyone. That might change things a little bit. Do you want to try now?
Yeah, there we go. It's done.
Fabulous.
Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, right. To start with, apologies if everyone knows what the census is, but for those who don't, this is the sort of official definition. So as it sort of says on the screen, it provides estimates of the characteristics of all people and households in England and Wales on Census Day, the 21st of March 2021. And it is carried out every 10 years and aims to give the most accurate estimate of all the people and households in England and Wales. Again, this is probably for my benefit just as much as yours, but in terms of the definitions of what it means when it describes the things that it measures. So the usual resident or the people that the individual people it looks at, they are defined officially as anyone who on the day of the census in March 2021 had stayed or intended to stay in the UK for a period of 12 months or more, or had a permanent UK address, but was outside the UK, but intended to be returned to the UK in less than 12 months, which is quite a mouthful. And a household is classed as one person living alone or a group of people who don't have to be related, living at the same address and share some basic facilities, a living room, sitting room, or dining area. Right. So to start with, a quick overview of what the data reveals about population and how it's changed in the decade between 2011 and 2021. So 2021, approximately 546,000 people were recording as living in Bradford district. And this represents an increase of just over 4.5% on the 522,000 people approximately who were living in the district in 2011. The figure of 546,000 people currently the latest census makes Bradford the third most populated local authority in Yorkshire and Humber, behind Leeds and Sheffield, and the seventh most populated in England. So the increase in population size of 4.6% was greater than that for Yorkshire and Humber, which was at 3.7%, but a smaller increase than that of England at 6.6%. And in terms of population density, which is the amount of people who live per square kilometre, again, it's the third most densely populated local authority in Yorkshire, behind Hull and Sheffield, and the 77th in England. And this is sort of a little graphic to show the population in 2021 in each of the parliamentary constituencies. And the bottom here is sort of the district overall. So this sort of illustrates that in terms of the change from 2011 on the right hand side, south and west, there's the population of which had changed the least compared to the rest of the district, which was averages 7% overall, but as we can see, south and west almost the same at just under 2.5%. And as the previous graphic showed, Bradford East is the largest parliamentary constituency, not by much, by hundreds, a few hundreds, a population of about 120,000, which was an increase of 7% compared to the population in 2011, but it was that showed the largest growth of all the constituencies. The same as the previous census in 2011, city ward is the most populous, with just under 24,000 residents. And as again with 2011, Toller is the most densely populated ward, with just over 9,000 residents per square kilometre. And in terms of the change of population, Heaton, the Heaton ward, saw the number of residents increasing by 14%, which was the biggest increase in terms of a council ward in the district. And it was only, overall out of the 30 wards in the district, there was just 2 that showed a fall in population, and that was Bingley and Worth Valley. Right, now we're going to have a look at an aspect of ethnicity and what the census shows in that regard. So in 2021, in terms of sort of a higher level ethnicity, because the census likes to group things and households and people into categories, in terms of the higher level, so there was 19 higher level ethnicities that you could identify with, and then go into further detail. But in terms of the higher level, that just under 2/3 of Bradford residents described their ethnicity as white, which showed a fall of 6% in comparison to 2011. Conversely, 2021 saw an increase in the number of residents identifying as Asian or Asian British. Again, this is like a higher level group. The people had the opportunity then to, identify with a more specific ethnicity, which we'll come on to in presently. So yeah, in 2011, the number of residents identifying as Asian or Asian British was about just under 27% of the population, but in 2021, this had increased to 32%. So in terms of specific ethnic, ethnicity, and white, in terms of UK, that means English, Scottish, Northern Irish, or Welsh, or British, and this fell to 56.7% in 2021. One of the reasons that has been suggested in terms of perhaps the quality of the data in this regard, and the fall in people that contributed to this fall, could also be based a simple reason that they changed the order of the question. It used to be English at the top, but then they changed it to British for this census. I don't know why, but in terms of the ethnicity and UK British ethnicity in terms of award, 2021, it was just over 95% of residents in Worth Valley identified as white, UK or British, which was the highest in the district. So this chart here looks at the detailed ethnicities. So as I said previously, you could specify sort of you belonged or identified with one of 19 larger groups, larger categories of ethnicity, and then you have the opportunity to be more specific. So this shows the top 10 sort of detailed named ethnicities in 2011, and their relative position in 2021. So the sort of grey icons represent that there's been no change in the relative position, but as you can see in the brackets, the numbers of the individuals identifying with those specific ethnicities has increased for the majority. In terms of the the lighter red counters show the specific ethnicities that show the greatest fall in their relative position, and the darker red just show a slight fall. And on the other side, the darker blue shows the sort of an increase in their position, but the lighter blue shows the greatest change. So the European mixed identity was obviously 16th overall in 2011, but it moved into the top 10 in 2021. And then sort of looking within the Asian British, again, the category, one of 19 categories, the numbers of residents identifying as Pakistani or British Pakistani increased by just over 20% in 2011, which is about 106,000 residents, to just under 140,000 residents in 2021, which was a quarter of residents in the district. And Toller is the council ward with the largest population identifying as Pakistani or British Pakistani, with 75%. Looking at Indian or British Indian, that was the identity within Asian or Asian British, the higher level category, that showed the smallest increase at just 0.05%. So it was 2.59% in 2011, and it's only increased to 2.6%. But in terms of actual numbers, the actual population within its city ward that has the biggest population of people identifying as Indian or British Indian, and it was actually Kashmiri identity that in the top 10 was the identity where the proportion of people doubled. I mean, it's a very small percentage overall, but it did double from increase from just over 1,700 people to just under 3,500 people. And Keighley Central is the ward with the largest Kashmiri population, which only accounts for 2.4% of residents who live in that ward. And this sort of graphic again just shows the change, the proportions of residents with those specific Asian or Asian British identities, ethnicities, sorry, and how they compare to Yorkshire and England overall. So obviously, in terms of the whole population of England, just under 3% are Pakistani or British Pakistani, but obviously, as we can see, Bradford, that sort of books the national trend by quite a long way. Indian or British Indian is slightly less than the national proportion, but Kashmiri, again, although it's only a tiny fraction overall, but it is more than England or Yorkshire and Humber.
I'm so sorry, Jonathan. Can we whiz through the slides, the last few, please, because we don't have much time, and I'm conscious people might want to ask some questions.
No, that's fine. No, I'll
hurry
up. Well, I'll just skip to the interesting bit, the nice graphics. So here, this shows the number of and percentage of the overall population of Bradford district, the year of arrival in the UK, or whether they were born in the UK. So this sort of speaks for itself, as we can see that 81% of residents in March 2021 were born in the UK, but 6.5% of the usual population had arrived in the UK, but obviously we don't necessarily know whether they straight to Bradford district, but in the decade preceding 2021. So that I think that's quite an interesting graphic. Again, sort of from 2001, obviously there's in terms of year of arrival, they're the biggest proportions. That just goes into a bit more detail. Then we've got religion. Again, I'll skip to the interesting graphic. In the green is the figures for 2011 in terms of the proportion of residents and the actual number. So we can see a big fall in people identifying as Christian, and that sort of reflects the national picture. And again, whether this is related or not, I don't know. People don't know, but the fall in the number of people identifying as Christian, is that something to do with the sort of largely, does that mirror the rise in the number of people who state they don't have a religion? And then the increase in the population of Bradford district in the middle here, who identify as Muslim. That's sort of increased in the decade since 2011. And then just to end on this one, which I think is probably one of the most interesting graphics here, is this is the number of households that are classed as deprived in one of four ways, whether there's an individual who has poor health in the household, is currently unemployed, or one person I think doesn't have any qualifications, or it's a level 1 qualification, or they have a disability, and overall, and mirroring it nationally and within the region, the number of households that were deprived in one of these dimensions has fallen since in every constituency since 2011. So the green dots are 2011, and as you can see, everyone has moved back. The proportion of households has fallen, but obviously Bradford East and Bradford South and West are above the England and Yorkshire average, as it were. And that's that. And that's just the figures there that show the number of households, and we can see that they've all fallen. And that's it.
Thank you so very much for that, Jonathan. We've had a question about how the year of data compares nationally, but I'm happy for you to kind of maybe put an answer in the chat if you can think of anything, or maybe it might be that because the data is so broad in terms of what we've presented here.
What I'll do, I'll put the link in if people aren't aware of it, of the there's a link that the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, they've done this quite clever graphic of how the districts compared. It doesn't go into detail in terms of constituencies and wards, but it shows how Bradford's changed in certain respects over the last 10 years and compares it to the rest of Yorkshire and England. So I'll pop that in the link now, chat now.
Fabulous. Thank you so very much, Jonathan. So now it's over to Helen and Mark. Are you still there, Helen and Mark? Fabulous. So,
Yes.
and I think Mark might still be kind of somewhere in the background. I can't see him, but hopefully he's there. So there we are. Thank you, Mark. So
yeah, I was just typing in the chat actually. The council has started to produce a number of briefings on the census and I've just put the link to that.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Going forward, we will keep, as the data becomes more available, particularly at a lower level, and this and the multivariate nature of that, we'll start producing more, and it's got some of the national and regional comparators that I think that one of the people were talking about just before that.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Mark. So kind of coming on to the kind of first part of the second kind of part of the session, in terms of the reflections. So what are your reflections? Shall we start with you, Mark? Do you have any reflections on kind of what you've heard so far?
But I mean, there's two key things for me. When I've seen the 2021 census data, and to be fair, as it compared to previous years, with the 2011 census, I did far more work on it. Actually, this time round, I've not spent as much time on it. But for me, there are no great surprises actually in the data. You know, all the things that Jonathan's highlighted are things that we could probably have guessed at. And I think in terms of me, I think what we need to look at is with Bradford. It's always that kind of the lower level, the lower super output area, the mid super output area analysis that really brings to life what's actually going on. You know, my experience of living in Bradford in that time is that it has become more diverse. I think you know, I remember it's 2001 census data when the ethnic minority population kind of increased, but actually Bradford became more diverse, and I think that's the kind of thing that I see. You know, that the parts of Bradford that have seen the biggest increases in population are those areas that are becoming more diverse because as we're seeing social mobility, and I think those are the things that I'm kind of interested in. The other thing that, and I'm speaking very fast here, and I'll apologise and I'll slow down. The other thing is that 2021 was quite an extraordinary year because of COVID, and actually in terms of that deprivation data, because deprivation went down compared to 2011, but the thing that I note from employment data is that 2021 was the highest rate of employment in the district, and there are all sorts of interesting reasons why 2021 might have seemed a lot better economically than it actually was. There are things around furlough where people who perhaps might have been in insecure or off the books, but all of a sudden that it was, if you had to claim a furlough payment, people became their employment status was kind of reinforced. So that I think that level of there was a high level of employment in 2021, and so it might be there is some. I'm aware of the conversations happening around the 21 census that how reflective of was 2021 of the true picture, and again, as always with census and always with inner places that have got lots of inner city areas, how reflective and how accurate is the census. And I don't know whether Jonathan's got any views on that. I know that this time around I wasn't doing the doorstepping, beefing up the survey, the census responses to make sure that it truly reflected, because we do know that people who haven't got, you know, if you've got an online census, then people whose English isn't, don't have English as first language or who are as literate, maybe the responses are not going to be as good. So I think that we always have to recognise that. But in general, the picture that the data is painting for me is something I recognise.
Simon, you're on mute. Sorry.
Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Mark. So yeah, this is some of the conversations I've been having with Jonathan as well, and we were wondering, coming from my psychology background really, is how much of what we saw in the 2021 census data was a reflection of the comparison people made to the better position they were in compared to COVID, and the kind of struggles they had in COVID, because some of this data looks quite positive, and you know, Bradford kind of looks like it's doing better in terms of reprobation compared to 2011, but obviously after COVID we expected something different. So maybe it is kind of about coming out of COVID and people kind of feeling positive about the fact that we're kind of away from there. So moving on to Helen, it'd be great to hear about your reflections, Helen, on the census data, please.
Yeah, so I mean, it may be a landscape that we expect to see. I suppose, kind of like for me, you can see that you know, things are changing. You know, kind of like with each census, and you know, the mix, the mix of communities and what have you in Bradford is changing. I think we're getting a, you know, much richer landscape, and I suppose kind of like you know, one of the things that I'm interested in is that often people will learn something now, and then they will still hold that same view in 15 or 20 years' time. So kind of like having the census data released is really, really useful because it actually helps in many respects for people to challenge what they think they know. Because often we stop our, we know something, we just stop our learning. So for instance, I know this isn't directly related to the to the presentation, but I interviewed somebody some years ago for a job as an armed forces support worker, and they were telling me about the 3 top problems in Bradford.
We are here at the City Wellbeing Hub every Monday and every Friday from 11 till 3. Come see us if you got any issues.
I'm not sure where that came from. It didn't come from here. But when I asked them where they got their information from about, the priorities, they said when they'd left the services, and that was 20 years previously. So I kind of think it is good. It's kind of like we can look at this, these data and kind of see stuff that we recognise. But that's not to. I think that's kind of missing, that you can see it is changing. So in the next 10 years, they expect kind of much more of that as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you for that. So my next question, I don't think we've got any more posts in the chat just yet. So while we're waiting for everyone, you are free to kind of share any questions that you might have for our panel members or for Jonathan. So my next question is, what challenges, Helen and Mark, do you foresee for organisations in the Bradford district, private, public and voluntary, in light of what you've heard in respect of your specialisms?
Who would you like to go first? Shall I go first? Yeah, this time.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I mean, the challenges for organisations is basically, say, like for an organisation like the council, we do need to know who the people are that we're serving, and like if we don't know that and we don't keep up with that, our services are poorer for that. One of the challenges, though, is in my view, is just relying on the kind of like the data as such, and also the data that you choose to look at, because depending on the data you choose to look at will determine what you see. And so it's kind of like a challenge is making sure that kind of like when you're considering what might be needed, that you're looking wide enough and across, kind of like variable data, I suppose, various packages of data. But also on top of that, data isn't people, and there isn't any kind of like quick way of kind of like improving things. Sorry, I'll just get rid of this. Sorry about that. There isn't any way, to me, it's kind of like the data can take you so far, but actually nothing should get in the way of actually engaging with people whose services kind of like impact, and involving them in how how those services and provisions get developed. The data can kind of help you identify who they are and can help you to identify big issues. But it's only when you talk to people, I believe, and involve them, that you really start to develop services and provision that is fit for purpose. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, before I go on to the challenges, I just do want to highlight there's some positive stuff in this data. One of the things, for example, the proportion of the population qualified to degree level has gone up a lot. I think it's a big sort of 25% increase on 2011. There's more people in work, more women in work. I think that I think there's always been this tendency with the census that somehow it says something bad about Bradford, and actually there's lots of really good positive stories in there. And I'll point out, again, that that we have a much more diverse population, you know, an increase in the number of people that are non-white or white British. But actually, what we're seeing across the district is that the district itself is becoming far more diverse because people are mixing more. So you know, in terms of challenges, I think let's not always look for the. I always look for the good stuff as well, and the positive stories in here, and I think there are quite a few. I think that there are a couple of things that stand out for me that I would focus on. You know, whether deprivation is truly measured through the metrics they have. You know, just as I say, the employment deprivation metric was based on the number of people in work. We know that actually 2021, in terms of the data, was a high point for numbers of people in work, extraordinarily, given that we were in the middle of COVID. But the thing for me that even taking that into account, when we draw those maps of deprivation across the Bradford, it's still the same picture that was 2011, 2001, 1991. We're still looking at central Bradford. We're still looking at central Keighley, where that poverty and deprivation lives by and large in our district. It's really interesting for me that when I look at the population change, that city ward population stayed quite static. I think it only increased by 44. Now, actually, it's still the most populous ward in the district at 23,000 people, whereas Wharfdale's got 14,000 people. So, you know, but it struck me that actually that is perhaps reflects that the city centre still isn't performing as we would want it to. So that's things that I'll be looking at. The really interesting thing for me is that given that the areas that don't do as well socio-economically kind of don't seem to change, but actually what we really need to be looking at is how's the flow of population through those areas, because actually my experience of Bradford over the last 10 years that the social mobility is happening, that people are doing better economically, but is the idea that they move. So, you know, the big increase in the number of people living in Craven, in other parts of the district. What's that internal movement? What's that internal dynamic? And I think that's quite interesting for me. And I think that's where I'd be focused on, to understand which parts of Bradford are standing still, which parts of Bradford are on the up, and to try and understand that and what are the drivers for that.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. Thank you. So you kind of jumped into my next question as well in regards to the opportunities for organisations in the district. So Helen, maybe you want to share a little bit about the opportunities that you think kind of come out of some of this data on kind of race, ethnicity, religion, and also kind of some of the stuff that Mark has mentioned around the intersection of things like ethnicity, women, gender, and work. Unfortunately, we don't have that data yet, but kind of maybe some insight on how useful it could be when we do get that data.
Yeah. So, I mean, the picture is that we're culturally rich with lots of different communities. It should really make for a fantastic city of culture. Yeah. So that's a very positive thing. I think yeah, it's kind of like this the opportunities, obviously the data's there. There are opportunities, for organisations across Bradford to start using that to look at how they might, kind of what services they might be offering in the future, or how they might be securing those services, and businesses also looking at, the rich, diverse workforce that's going to be there as well. So I think the just looking, if you're just looking at the data that comes out and different data that's available around, kind of like you can actually start to business plan and service plan and what have you. And I always think having some kind of plan is better than having no plan, because if you've got some kind of plan, at least you know when you're deviating from it, and at least you can start to measure and track whether what you're doing is actually having that the desired effect. That's not to say, I mean, everything, and I suppose kind of like the other thing is that everything doesn't stay still. So this, for instance, the census data is one set of data that would be used. There's a whole host of other data, but like the census data is a snapshot in time. And, you know, kind of like we know in years to come, they will look back at this census data. And I think, you know, people that come after us will have will be better able likely to pinpoint why, you know, all the different reasons why it was so, you know, why it was as it was. You know, like, you know, deprivation going down apparently in 21 and what have you. And I think, you know, it'll be very interesting for people in the future. For now, I kind of think, you know, there are lots of opportunities. There's lots to go at there, but there's always caveats as well. It's just part of the picture. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen.
And the thing that I would add as well is that obviously, in terms of equalities and ethnicity, race, those things, the census is a really rich data source, and often is often the only set data that's available at that level. So we have to mine it for those stories around that, and look for what it's telling us around disadvantage, around opportunity. You know, that's what we have to do with this, because there is other data, you know, and again, I largely deal with economic data, but there is no other data set that has got that level of detail around things like gender and ethnicity and age that the census has. So that, and if you're talking about trying to get a handle on equalities and those kind of things, the census is a critical piece of data without any shadow of a doubt.
Thank you very much, Mark. So I just something that came up in the chat earlier, and I just realised it's actually linked to a picture I'm sending now, Jonathan. So I'm wondering whether, not now, obviously, maybe at some point you can maybe show us a comparison between what this chart here looks like for the UK, because it'd be interesting to see. We know Bradford is a city of sanctuary, and we know we kind of welcome a lot of migrants into Bradford, but what does that picture look like in comparison to the rest of the country? So moving back to Mark and Helen, if anybody else has got any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. So the next question I have for you is what your thoughts are on organisations, the needs of organisations, and what they kind of need to do from an equality and equity perspective. Thinking of the cost of living crisis, to continue to deliver high quality kind of standard in their services. So from an inequality and equity perspective, and thinking about the cost of living crisis, what can organisations do, or do they need to do to continue to deliver services at a high quality standard?
Mark, do you want me to go first? I'm happy to.
Go on, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, as Mark said, you know, the census data does, you know, is very rich in kind of providing us with, you know, a base for equality, you know, of equality data and what have you. I think people locally will know as well that one of the Bradford Council's protected characteristics, equality protected characteristics, is around low income. So certainly, you know, the Bradford Council and its partners have recognised how you know, people on low income, whatever ethnicity they are or what have you, will, you know, they don't have the same opportunities as you know, as other residents in the district. So again, I mean, kind of looking at when we're looking at services and service development and provision, we do, you know, like we'll use census data. We can use data that we've collected, you know, from when people have used services. I think kind of like I'm aware of work that's been going on across the district and within the council to look at some minimum data sets to collect. You know, around service provision, because obviously we need to know who's using the services, which communities are using the services, and actually compare that with the other data that we've got about who's actually living in that area, because then you can start to identify, you know, where, you know, like if certain people with certain characteristics aren't using those services and the universal services, you know, like library or swimming bath or what have you, you can start to look at that, and you can start to engage with groups, to find out why it is, that they're not benefiting, from those services, and then, you can start to kind of like address that. I think the difficulty will be in continuing to deliver high quality standard services, because I think we can try and make the services as high quality as possible, but I think everybody on the call will realise that, for instance, Bradford Council has lost over £300 million from its budgets since 2010. And actually, so kind of like at a time when inflation is running at 14%, well, it's probably not 14% now, but inflation is running high. Bradford Council, its budgets have been going down year on year on year. So again, it's kind of like, I think like in looking at the data, in examining the data, looking at who's using the services, talking to people, across, like who you'd expect to use services and benefit from the provision, you can actually develop the best standard service possible. And it's always got to be, bearing in mind with the money that's available, which unfortunately has been reducing over the years.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Helen. Mark, do you have anything to add?
I think the thing that I would again is that digging deep into some of the data. So things like people living in poor housing, people whether in work or not, and crossing that with ethnic background, with their kind of occupational status, and again for me, the thing that it's a snapshot in time, but actually the district isn't static. The people. What I'm really interested in often is looking for is where's the direction of travel, and because that's the key thing here in terms of if we've got a situation. We were talking in a separate forum about if the danger with a snapshot is that you sort of say, oh, Bradford's got, say, a lower than average employment rate. But actually, if employment in Bradford is improving at twice the national rate, it might be that you can sort of say to yourself, well, actually, on that trajectory, it's all about trajectories. Actually, there's an idea that if that trajectory continues, and you understand why that trajectory is happening, that actually in 5 years' time, that might not be the issue that we think it is now. So that direction of travel. So and the other thing is that some things that might not seem such a big deal, but if they've increased massively, then you've always got to. It's not just the snapshot in time. It's about those longer term trajectories, and it is around the key things that we're interested in. And it's notwithstanding Helen's point about that our resources to impact on any of this are less. In terms of equalities, I've been doing some stuff at the West Yorkshire level with West Yorkshire Plan, and what the State of the Region report. And one of my big comments about that, there's not much point in pointing out that West Yorkshire's got a 1% difference in employment rate to the national picture, when within West Yorkshire there's a 15 percentage point difference between different parts of the district. And if you're talking about levelling up, perhaps the issue about levelling up, for example, is about those differences within places, within communities that drive that levelling up agenda. And that'd be one of my things around this is to always be reflecting that it's understanding a place in detail, and that low level is where you get true understanding of what the dynamics of a place are, and that's what I'm always looking to do with this data.
Thank you very much, Mark. You seem to jump ahead and kind of answer the next question that I'm going to ask. So before I do ask the next question, I'm going to open up to the audience, because I'm quite conscious that we don't have a lot of time, and I want to make sure everyone is aware they have got an opportunity to kind of contribute and ask a question. So do we have anything that the audience would like to ask of Helen, Mark? or Jonathan? Any burning questions? Thank you, Zara. So it must just be me that can't see it. I'm not sure what's happened to my screen, but that's fine. Okay, so if there isn't any other burning question, I'll move on to my next question, and it's about the future, as you probably already guessed. So what do you think the future might look like in the next 10 years? And what do you think will have changed in the future, both positive and negative, for Bradford? So how will this landscape that we've seen today in this presentation change over the next decade?
Hi, me again. Yeah, I think the basically kind of like the change, the changes in population and what have you, in religion and such will continue. And there'll be more of a diverse mix in 10 years' time. I kind of think because of things that we're doing in the district at the moment, such as we have the health determinants research collaboration going on, which is a big research collaboration between lots of bodies in the district, looking at what things, what works in improving health and what have you. It's just starting off now. I think through that we will have better use of our diminishing resources. So hopefully more of our people, will live longer and healthier lives, and have healthier lives for longer. I think kind of like we are expecting, we've got a big young population in Bradford. So kind of like in 10 years, some of there's probably going to be more babies around again. Who knows? And I suppose the challenge there will be in, I think Mark was talking about employment and jobs. And obviously, as the different populations grow and diminish, you need, different things in the district. So imagine, and I think it's I know it's in our plans, that we will need to create a good number of decent jobs that are decently paid, to ensure that our young people can have decent lives. Again, kind of like it is all linked in with their starting life as well, with education and everything like that. So I'm a very positive person. I believe that things will be as good as it can be in the district, and I kind of think we are going to use data and other means of finding things out to make sure that every penny we spend is well spent in supporting our district and our people. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. And from you, Mark.
Well, there's two things. I think the district's going to be older, that's for sure, in 10 years' time. I mean, that's the other dynamic of this. That the population of the UK, and Bradford is Asian. We are the youngest city in the UK, but one thing we know for sure is that as on average we're going to be older in 10 years' time. I think we will be more diverse, and absolutely that's a good thing. I think that in terms of, and I also think that in terms of those positives, I think we'll be a more highly skilled and highly educated population than we are now, because that's the direction of travel. I think we're more likely to have people in better jobs, and I think I say this really genuinely, that I look at the young people in this district and I look at how well they're doing at school. I go to the university and see the young people from this district that are studying there. They give me massive kind of confidence in where this city's going, if I'm absolutely honest with you, and I think that's going to be reflected going forward. I think, and this diversity, Bradford used to stand out because of that, But actually, that's the UK. You know, I've always had this line that the UK will look more like Bradford going forward, because, you know, Tony Reeves used to talk about Bradford being that face of modern Britain, and absolutely that's what this district is. So in terms of us going forward, we will be more diverse, we will be more older, and the rest of the country will reflect that. You know, rather than Bradford's sort of standing out because of that. And what I would like to see, hopefully, is that those differences within the district start to reduce, and I think that and if we start to see more strides in terms of you know, better outcomes in terms of equalities, that will happen naturally. You know, if we have better employment outcomes for people from ethnic minorities, then the places that people live will become more affluent, and actually I expect to see that to a degree. I think, and that's notwithstanding we are part of a global economy where no one knows where that's going currently, because there are so many uncertainties at a global level. But if we can, you know, if it's interesting that the latest chamber survey is starting to strike a positive note. So I think the economy moves forward. So that'd be my view. I would hope that in 10 years' time that some of those entrenched kind of differences within the district are starting to break down, because we are starting to see social mobility and social advancement across the district.
Thank you very, very much, Mark, and thank you, Helen. At this point, I'd usually ask for kind of some reflections and advice you'd give to senior leaders and managers. And I'm conscious we've got literally 2 minutes, so can I ask you to maybe give us something that's 30 seconds at a cap? What's one piece of advice you would give to senior leaders, team managers, heads of services in light of the census data in 30 seconds, please? Can we start with Mark, since you're not on mute, and then we'll go on to Helen?
30 seconds.
Yeah.
It's complicated, but my view would be to look for positives in this. I think we've beat ourselves up in the past when the census data has come out. I think we've moved beyond that now. I do, and we let's not obsessing about the obvious things, and let's start to look at the things that really matter.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, my advice would be not just to rely on this data, but obviously to go talk to people and see what, you know, see how their lives are for them, and kind of you know, what kind of advice they might offer and help they might offer in, you know, making Bradford and our neighbourhoods, you know, better places for everybody.
Thank you, Helen. As a qualitative researcher, I can't echo that enough. It's important that we go out there, we hear about people's stories and learn more about kind of what they want and what they need. And thank you, Mark. Again, this positive kind of reflection of what Bradford has, where we are now, and what we've got kind of in the pipeline for us in the future is definitely the way forward. We are the city of culture, and we'll celebrate that in a few years' time. And hopefully there's lots and lots of good things to come in the city centre. So without kind of holding anybody up any longer, thank you very much to our panel members. Thank you very much for Jonathan. And then we will send out the slides and upload this recording onto our diversity exchange, so this can be accessed by anybody that wasn't able to attend today's session. So thank you once again, and I look forward to seeing many of you in the rest of the Race Equality Week sessions through this week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.